Welcome back to the Hard Thing Podcast. The show is designed to teach you how to replicate accomplishing the hard things of some of the greatest people in the world. I'm your host, Justin Lewis, and having interviewed over 200 of these challenging people puts me in the perfect position to ask the right questions that will reveal exactly how they've done the hard things they've done. Today, I have an amazing guest that will teach you how to define your hula hoops, more on that later, why you need to save your asks for the opportune moments, and how to get what you ask more often than not without having to pay anything. Today, I talk with the millennial whisperer himself, Chris Tuff, who recently wrote the book, Save Your Asks. I know you're going to appreciate Chris's methods of connecting to people and building genuine relationships that will benefit you for years. So let's give it up and listen to Chris Tuff. All right. Well, thank you for coming on the Hard Thing Podcast, Chris. I'm excited to have you here and have this conversation.
Awesome. Good to be here.
Yeah. Well, let's start off the new year, right? And ask the question of what's the hardest thing you've ever done, Chris?
I think the hardest thing for me actually came, it was this time of the year. It was December 28th, 5 years ago. And I had hit my own rock bottom. And that manifested, people will ask, like, what was that rock bottom for you? And for me, a lot of people didn't see it, but it was, I was, having kind of panic attacks here and there. And I had lost sight of what was so important to me. And I think on the surface level, what a lot of people saw was this young guy who was going all over the world. And, I'd established a very, I think, well-known persona and, reputation as the kind of early guy in social media, which, I kind of fell into. I hit my rock bottom and I turned to my wife and I said, things have to change. And so I took a month off. And in that month, the main changes that happened was really changing my metric of success, which was beating my brothers at the game of life, which is a horrible metric of success. And I changed it to, when my head hits the pillow every night, did I have the impact that I intended? And am I living my life in line with my own purpose, which has and probably will always be, even back then, it is to inspire and connect. And, that was one of the big changes. I quit drinking also at that time. And I doubled down on my two daughters and wife. And I called it my hula hoops. And my brother was the one that said, Chris, you got to stay in your own hula hoop, right? Like no one else is allowed in except for you, your wife, Julie, and your two girls. And so that was the first of many tattoos, which now adorn my body and have kind of become part of my brand persona. But, the hardest thing for me was turning to my wife and say, I'm not okay. And I'm seeking change. And, I think even from like my friend group, they're like, Chris, like, you don't even drink that much. Like, you don't even like, I can't believe this is your low point, right? Like that you always seem so good. And I think everyone's got a different status quo, right? And my status quo is like way up here. Yeah. It was really interesting in that month and talking to, professionals. The doctor turned to me and I'm an identical twin. And he had looked at my brother's blood work and he put them up next to each other. And I was being treated almost like a science experiment. He was like, Chris, here's my piece of advice. First of all, your blood's very different than your twin brother. I have two pieces of advice for you. One, don't drink or do drugs because you are kind of born happy. Like you're mid-level or your low level is like most people's mid-level. And then the second thing is, Chris, go out and change the world. And that next year, Justin, it was a tough year because I kind of was relearning life through this new lens. And there's a lot of downtime. And I turned to my wife right towards the end of that. Well, I didn't know it was the end. And I said, you know what? Like, I feel like I don't even have any friends anymore. And she got teary-eyed because she knows how outgoing and extroverted I am. She's the opposite. She's introverted, but also an identical twin, coincidentally. And she was sad for me, but it was right around that time that I then ended up going on an executive retreat with 14 executives. And through this mindset of kind of changing that metric, I really made it a point to double down on my team at my agency where I'm a partner. And I introduced myself at that. I was like, well, shoot, what do I introduce myself as? Because I'm not really the digital and social guy anymore. And so on the spot, I said, yeah, so I'm Chris Tuff. I'm kind of like the millennial whisperer at my firm. We're 400 employees, mostly millennials and Gen Zers, blah, blah, blah. And then I went on and shared my story, and I sat down at the fire afterwards. And the guy leading it, Tommy Breedlove, he kicks me and he goes, Chris, you got to write that book. And I didn't know Tommy at the time. And I was like, what book? He goes, The Millennial Whisperer. And sure enough, I was like, all right. So he planted that seed. And then the rest was kind of history. I wrote The Millennial Whisperer in a 4-month time period, brought it to market pretty quickly. And it went on to sell over 100,000 copies, got me on the main stage at Nike, which then opened up the door for my agency. And so then everything kind of fell into place in a weird, but non-linear way. And so as I look at kind of life, and as I talk to a lot of young kind of eager business people, they say, so Chris, like, how did you do? I can't believe this is your life. Like, your life is, you wake up every day and you're just constantly meeting and connecting with people. Like, how'd you do that? And, what I emphasize and why I wrote this next book, Save Your Asks, ASKS, which is due out in March, is I think it's really important that we look at ourselves and we understand, one, what our purpose is, right? And mine's to inspire and connect. And I think we all aspire for a life where passion, purpose, and profession all overlap. And the only way that that can exist is by evolving our currencies. And all of us have a currency in our day job. And that currency might not be something that you're passionate about. Because I talk to lawyers that are, managing partners at their law firm and they're miserable. And I ask them, well, why'd you get into law? They're like, well, my dad was a lawyer. So I went into it. And it's like, okay. And then like, well, so what do I do now? I'm like, well, you got to evolve your currency. But first of all, in order to know where it is that you need to evolve, you got to understand your passion and your purpose. And so it's really with that mentality that I kind of, they say in book writing, sell them what they want and you give them what they need. And what I'm selling in this new book, Save Your Asks, is I will help you triple your sales almost overnight with tactics that cost $0 to implement. But what I'm giving people is this idea that we've got to be evolving our currencies with side hustles that actually also end up making us better networkers as well. And so that's my quick tirade on my hardest thing that I've ever done was looking in the mirror and looking at my wife and saying things have to change. And I did. So I took the house down to the studs and I rebuilt it pretty quick.
Well, you have laid out a veritable buffet of topics for me to pick at and ask questions about. So hopefully, we can make this make sense for the audience. But you mentioned a concept, hula hoops, and you said that you got that tattooed. Yeah. Can you explain exactly what that means and how you apply that in your life?
Yeah, I think so often in life we get distracted by other people's needs. And especially people pleasers or helpers like me. I'm a people pleaser and a helper. It is exhausting, right? When we become dependent on other people's either validation or ups and downs, which are bound to happen. And one of the most important things is we've got to establish our own hula hoop and only allow a couple people into it. And those are the things that can impact you, right? Those are the things that can really, I think, integrate into your day to day. And everyone, hula hoops are small, right? Like you're only allowed a couple people in that. And as I looked at my own hula hoop, it's like, okay, well, the only 3 people that I want in that thing are my wife and my 2 daughters. And then everyone else is outside of that. And it's such a great, I think, metaphor to live by, because when sure enough, that friend who may or may not be an ask hole, right? The one that's constantly asking, you dread their call, right? Those takers. Yeah. So many of us, I think, end up going on other people's roller coasters versus establishing boundaries of our what should be our hula hoop.
Wow. So it's essentially a method for setting your priorities of what you'll say yes to habitually and what you'll say no to habitually. Is that right?
Yeah, and where you're going to invest your emotional energy.
Yeah,
yeah,
that makes sense. And one thing I would add to that is, it's nice to say yes to other people and help them, but if you're not making plans for yourself, then you're figuring in someone else's plan.
100%. And I talk about that and especially as it relates to networking, right? There is what I call an ask continuum. And on the far left of that ask continuum are the takers, right? Those are the ask calls. Those are the people that go in for 3 asks in a row. And then on the far right are where I actually sit, which is oftentimes we let the ask pass us by, right? Because we're people pleasers and we feel like asking something of others is a take. And right. We just want to give, right? And so where it is that we lie on that continuum, we've got to take action towards the middle. And so if we're an asshole, we've got to save that ask more often and double down in connection first. And if we're the person that lets the ask pass them by, we've got to be more opportunistic in how we go about that ask to be more genuine to who we are and what we live by. And I've got a couple other tactics to that. One of them being masking your ask in your dream. And I think so often it's like, well, if I want to move up in my corporation, or if I want to start an entrepreneurial endeavor, as I'm going out and networking these people that I see kind of further along than me, what do I have to add to them? And you also look through this kind of lens of relationships. There is nothing more powerful than asking someone else what their dream is, right? And so it's because people will be like, so Chris, you talk about this concept of a race to the middle, which is finding that common ground between you and that other person. And I'm really good at that, but I get stuck in the middle. How do you take it to the next level? Well, you ask that person, what is your dream? And when they share that dream with you, it establishes a vulnerability and bond that is unbreakable. But not only that, when you go and you do something for that other person to help them achieve that dream or move towards it, it establishes negative reciprocity, where in a very genuine way. The same is true as we go in for those asks. If we're someone that lets the ask pass us by, when we mask our ask in our dream and not in a genuine way, you're going to get almost 100% hit rate. And so one of the examples I use, Justin, how I think I ended up interviewing like 7 billionaires for this new book. And people were like, Chris, how did you get access to the people? And I said, it was actually pretty simple. I masked my ask with my dream, where at the end of every conversation, I said, all right, here it comes. I'm going to practice my favorite new tactic and strategy in my new book. I'm going to mask my ask in my dream. And it is my dream, in this case, one of the first people I interviewed, his name's Justin as well. And I said, Justin, it is my dream to create a handbook, which is right here. I'm holding it in my hands, that whether you just graduated from college or you're in your mid-30s or going through a midlife crisis at 55 or 60, I want to create a handbook that people can take action on to help them achieve this magic place where purpose, passion, and profession can all overlap. And who in your network do I have to talk to? And then they kind of light up and they're like, oh my God, well, this is Chris's dream. And his intentions are pure. You got to talk to this one blank, blank, and blank, right? And so then you end up talking to the next person. And it's an amazing strategy that we can approach, especially if we're on that other side of that ask continuum, that I think has massive rewards.
Wow. That is really powerful. Because I mean, even you just saying that to me, I'm thinking like, wow, okay, who can I who would fit that? You know what I mean? And I've just seen so many times when someone asks me to do something and I'm like, I'm a giver. I'm a giver, I guess. That's the way to put it. People will be like, hey, can you help me with this or whatnot? And I know the difference between when someone's like, I'm really trying to do this in my life. And like, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. can you help me? And I'm excited to help them because somehow I'm invested.
Sure.
Versus when someone's like, hey, can you help me move that dishwasher or whatever? And it's
totally
like, that, no, I don't want to do
that. Well,
that.
and I think that's an important point too, right? And what I try to get people to understand is out of everyone in our world, you get one ask out of them. What do you want that ask to be? And you'll see in my new book, one of the things that book writers do is they ask for endorsements from famous people. Yeah. And in my endorsements, I'm like, I say up front, sorry, I didn't get any endorsements because I'm saving my asks. For all of those people that I would ask for an endorsement, I'm not going to waste it trying to get them to give me some little blurb. So I'm saving it for all those people, right? So, and the same is true for anything that we're trying to get people to do. We only have one ask in any of them. What do you want that thing to be? And I think we are so often looking at what's immediately in front of us versus taking in the bigger picture. And I also like to say, and I think you're this way, is you got to do like 30 gives before you do the ask, because that's where connection comes from. And once again, especially for us that kind of tend to be patient and save our asks, we're a lot more effective at being able to capitalize on them when it's time.
Right. So I guess the simple way to ask this question is, how do you find the perfect time to ask?
Oh, that's a great question. So, and that's towards the end of the book, but you've got to capitalize on the moment. And so, I use a couple examples of people that have done it with me. And I think in person, first of all, is you're going to be a lot more successful when you can sit across from someone, especially coming out of this COVID stuff. So, trying to be in person or on a Zoom, I think is really important. Or, kind of second to that would be on a phone call. And then the last thing, don't do it in an email or a text. Just don't do it. Don't go in for your asks there, like, even though it might be tempting. And then the other piece is that the relationship needs to be far enough along that you can say that you have a genuine connection with that other person. Do you know the names, like truly know the names of their kids, right? And I think so many people, business is business, and that line got blurred a long time ago. So I do a lot of my business meetings on a mountain bike or playing, now pickleball is my new thing. Or, I did a 5-mile run with a guy in town who's probably, one of the more famous people in Atlanta, right? Like it's in those moments that connection is made. And then coming off of that is when you go in for the ask, right? Like when we're walking back to our cars, hey dude, like, how I was talking to you about this, this, and this, what do you think about blank? Right? Like, so it's imprecise, right? Mm-hmm. But you've got to ask yourself, do I have a genuine connection with this person at this time? And I'm not giving advice for people with short, kind of cheaper sales cycles, right? Like, I'm not probably going to be the best resource for someone that has a sales cycle of 2 weeks. I'm talking about the higher dollar, longer term sales cycle asks, which I think for any sophisticated networker, that's what we're talking about here. So, so I would say look at other resources if you're kind of selling more of a cheaper product that has those shorter sales cycles. That I'm probably not the best resource for you here.
That makes sense. And actually, I think now might be a good time to maybe ask you to define ask. Like, what do you mean when you say ask? Because I'm kind of getting the idea that it's not necessarily, hey, can you help me move this Friday or things like that. But maybe it is.
Your ask can be anything, right? But like, to me, it's one big kind of macro game of what is it that you want to get out of this thing. Mm-hmm. And if you change kind of even just that word networking to connecting, to me, it's how do you establish genuine connection, right? And I talk a lot about with, how I've been able to be so successful in my ability to both network and sell. It's that I end up becoming good friends with all these people. And then a byproduct of that friendship and connection is you end up doing business together. You end up creating companies. You end up, it's a byproduct of connection. And so to me, as you look at kind of those asks, right? Like any relationship is built around a give and take. And once again, save any form of like that business ask. Hey, can I pitch your company on blank, blank, and blank, right? Or can I get an introduction to this person or that person? I save it, right? And I think so, like my whole inbox every single day, it's filled with people going in for an ask way too early. Being, hey, Chris, can I get 5 minutes of your time? It's like, wait, dude. Like, seriously?
Yeah.
Like I mean, how about doing just a teeny bit of research and use that before you go in for the ask? Like just do a teeny bit of research. It's amazing to me. Someone asked me, I had to screenshot it, but they said, Chris, have you ever thought about writing a book? I was like, listen, dude, like if you saw, like just in on LinkedIn, I'm like, underneath my name is national best-selling author of The Millennial Whisperer and author of my upcoming book, Save Your Asks. It's amazing to me how, and that's also where my confidence in being able to triple people's sales ability is so high, because everyone's doing it wrong. And this is a call to action for people to save their asks and really focus on that connection first.
Yeah. So I guess two questions. One, we'll start off with one first. if you ever watched the show The Office or any of their episodes? Yeah. So if you're excellent, if you remember, there's one episode where Dwight, he's a character on The Office for the audience who may not know. He starts doing all these nice things for the people in the office, saying, now they owe me a favor or things like that. So how do you do this without kind of devolving to that mindset of they're going to owe me because I'm doing this for them?
It's not tit for tat, and scorekeeping does not work in networking. And that's why I am always owed, right? Like when it comes time for it, right? If I were to try to capitalize on all of that built up reciprocity, I have so much ammunition in my in my arsenal, because I'm not looking at my relationships as being tit for tat. Oh, I'll give you this introduction, and then you give me this one, and then I'll do this, and then I'll do that. Just like in relationships, that's not healthy. The same is true, right? The same is true for our work lives and networking. And, even talking to the relationship thing, my wife and I are very deliberate about, it's not going to be, hey, I'll pick up the girls from school today, and then you can go out with your friends. And then on Friday, I'm going to go out with my friends and you pick up. It's never like that, right? And there are also seasons of our lives, right, that we will be more dependent on going to our friends for asks. We might be miserable in our job, right? And it might be time to make a change. It's going to be 6 months of capitalizing on some of those asks and that built up reciprocity. The key is that in those moments, make sure that you're vulnerable enough to share with your network why it is that you need to capitalize on that, and to not be that asshole. Because I think some people approach those seasons of life for way too long. And it's like, dude, it's been a year and a half and you've asked me for 37 intros to people because I'm connected to them on LinkedIn. Like, sorry, I can only give out 3 at a time here.
Right.
So, I think being cognizant of that is really important, and where you are in that season, and being truthful and honest with ourselves as to where we are.
I like that answer. The next question that kind of came up is more of a curiosity. So, you've told us that you're more of an extrovert, and you are energized by connecting with other people and being around them. Maybe not connecting, but just, being around them builds you up and energizes you. But for people like maybe myself and your wife, as you said, who are less so, does this work the same, or do they have to make any sort of modifications? Or
yeah, I think it depends on just how introverted you are, right? Okay. And one of the best things any big introvert can do is pair up with an extrovert like me. And what happens is that you can get through those awkward stages that absolutely crush your energy. I mean, I'm used to it with my wife, right? So like even in social situations, which we find ourselves in quite a bit, but we are pretty careful about which ones we attend and which ones we do not. But in those situations, she's dependent on me to kind of create that common ground, which I call a race to the middle with the other people. And then to get to the stuff that is real, right? That is, past the small talk, and then she can start diving in. And when, for example, when someone might be talking about their child being dyslexic and ADHD, she'll light up and be like, oh my gosh, yeah, we've been through that. Our eldest daughter is that, here's what we found works. And then boom, it's off to the races. And so one of the best things and strategies that, and I talk about in Save Your Ass is, find yourself an extrovert that you can pair up with. And, that's what we were born to do. Right. So, and it energizes us. So let us run with it.
Wow. Would you, and this is also another curiosity, do you think maybe extroverts are just more tolerant of small talk than introverts? If that makes sense.
Yes and no. I think we're talking about EQ here, right? And I think we're starting to hear more about EQ, emotional intelligence, brought up alongside IQ now than ever before.
Right.
But like, for example, like I call it, I will throw the ball against the wall twice in conversations. And what I mean by that is when I throw that ball, I'm not looking for small talk. I want to talk real stuff. Right. And that scares the crap out of people. And if I find that in these social situations or networking, that person is unwilling to go there to show that, tell me what your dream is, or, people are like, oh, Chris, that's so cheesy. What's another way of doing it? It's like, okay, well, just ask people what fires them up. Yeah. When I throw that ball against the wall and it comes back and it hits me in the face with, I don't know, right? I don't know what, I have no idea. And then it falls flat, I move on to the next. And the same is true for courtship with potential clients that suck. You don't want them as a client. So if you find yourself in a situation where it's difficult to make it work, move on, because you probably don't want, if that genuine kind of connection feels forced, you don't want them as a client. So move on to the next person or thing, because there are plenty of people out there, right? And I think chemistry is real, but I'm not talking. I don't do small talk. I go deep, and I go deep fast. And it's evident in my relationships. And, what, you'll love this. One of my other concepts that I talk about in kind of networking courtships is I was introduced to it by a well-known young entrepreneur named Jason Beckerman. And Jason and I were sharing a steak dinner in 2012. We had met in 2007, right as kind of Facebook was being established. There was a core group of us that kind of helped kind of build around it, blah, blah, blah. And we met in this kind of closed Facebook group for Facebook for marketers. And it was through 2007 and 2012, we found ourselves at this dinner celebrating the biggest deal of both of our lives, where we had hired them as our outsourced technology provider for our paid advertising on Facebook. And I turned to him and I said, Jason, the sales guy in me is so interested at the fact that we are where we are right now. How the hell did you pin me down after whatever it was, 5 years of meeting me in a closed Facebook group? Right. And he goes, Chris, I Shawshanked your ass. I was like, Shawshank, what is that? He goes, Chris, have you ever seen Shawshank Redemption? I'm like, absolutely. Like Andy Dufresne, blah, blah, blah. He was like, yeah. In Shawshank Redemption, he chipped away every single day to end up escaping. But he also wrote a letter every single week in order to get the library in the prison system refurbished and funded. And it wasn't until 2 years into that letter every single week that he got his first check. And then 10 years later, they had the nicest library in the prison system. And then he also ended up escaping. Every single week for the last 5 years, Chris, I've had a touch point with you. And it's been on Facebook Messenger. It's been on Instagram. It's been on text. It's been on email. But I've established and Shawshanked my way to where we are now at this table. And then I proved myself that we had the best technology. I was like, oh my gosh, Jason, I love that. I just got a call from a Fortune 50 company and they're trying to hire me as their digital and social person. And I was kind of rude to this CMO. And because I kind of, she wanted to hire me and I said, you can hire me ... as your agency partner. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to go Shawshank them. Right. So I ended up getting her cell phone and I called her and I said, listen, let me come down there and help you. Right. And because everyone's full of crap in the social media space right now, because there's very few that are truly innovative and know what they're talking about. So let me help you hire that person. I don't need anything in return. And it was 14 months later after I became best friends with the head of marketing and this certain CMO that we got our first big at bat for a huge promotion they were doing. And fast forward to today, we have 120 employees working on that one account.
Wow.
And so I love looking at these relationships. It's not just going to happen in one touch point. It's going to happen in many. And we've got to make Shawshanking a verb for all of us. And it's so funny too. People now, because I talk about it so much. So Chris, I know what you're doing. I know you're Shawshanking me. I'm like, well, is it working? And they're like, yeah, it is actually, Chris, it is.
Wow. My guess is that in those touch points, you're not trying to sell every single time, right?
No, I mean, never. I'm never selling. I'm establishing genuine connection. Wow. And I'm unlocking people's dreams. That's what, and as a super connector, there's a saying even at my agency, go to Chris Tuff for free stuff, because I know everyone. And as my network has gotten so vast, I know someone for everything. And so I've become, in a lot of these conversations, just a super connector of things. And one of my most exaggerated niche examples is I also try to give 20% of my time to coaching and mentoring people that wouldn't be able to otherwise kind of have access to crazy networks. And one of those individuals is the guy who's done all of my ink, and he actually designed the cover or the back part design of Savior Asks with all the Polynesian stuff, and his name's Kiyoki. And so I kind of, through my mentorship, encouraged him to open up his own shop because he was just paying someone else to be at their shop.
That's cool.
And he was at the final health inspection. And he calls me after it crying. And he was like, Chris, I'm out of money. I'm out of energy. COVID's crushing me. And I just got the health inspection and they said that I did not pass because the vinyl upholstery on my chairs, all 8 chairs, needs to be white and not black. What? I don't know what to do. And I said, Kiyoki, you won't believe this, but I just so happen to know the #1 manufacturer for vinyl upholstery. Let me call them and I'll be right back to you. So I called my friend Heather and I told her the situation. And within 24 hours, he had 8 brand new vinyl upholstered chairs for free. And so that I am constantly taking, and that's why this idea of currencies is so important. Yeah. I'm constantly acting as that super connector of matching needs and currencies. And, people are like, well, Chris, how do I figure out what my kind of, I know what it is that I do every day, but I also know what my passion and my purpose is, but how do I evolve to that next thing? And an exercise I have people do is pretend you're Google. What are people going to your search engine to look up, right? So for me, people go to me for my search engine for almost anything, right? Yeah. But some of those things that stand out are like vacation spots or where to go to get tattoos or how to be the father of young girls or, kiteboarding, how to get into kiteboarding, which is one of my huge passions. All of these things make us up as these individuals that then we build upon being a connector around because we're passionate and knowledgeable about it. And that's why through life, it's super, super, super important that we actually go after and foster both side hustles and hobbies, because that's what differentiates ourselves, as well as makes us knowledgeable in kind of what I would call these kind of sub currencies that could potentially overtake your main currency.
I think it would be a travesty if we finish this interview without talking about purpose. One of the things when you started talking about your hard thing, it's always a hard thing to reach out to someone and say, hey, I need, things aren't right and I need to make a change. And presumably, can you help me? When you started that process, how did you identify the things that needed change, and how did that help you find or determine or define your purpose?
I think purpose came first, and that exercise looked like this. I was going to see my executive coach, Barbara Jones, and I had the homework of putting down words that were my purpose. I had 2 minutes before that meeting. I looked on my notebook and I wrote down to inspire and connect. And that was it. And then the rest was history. And I think so many people failed to put in just the small bit of effort to put a stake in the ground. And the most important thing is that we put a stake in the ground. Otherwise, we are flying blind in life. Purpose comes first. And all of us have a purpose that we can put in a few words, not a paragraph, right? Not some vision statement. I'm talking about something that not only you can recognize and say every single day, but that all the people around you, they know that, like, every single person that becomes kind of in contact with me knows my purpose is to inspire and connect. Because I also shout it from the rooftops, but that is what purpose needs to be. And you can always change it, right? You can always evolve your purpose, but that then ends up acting as that guiding kind of sifter for where it is that we need to be going. So I think it's different in your question of what needs to change in our lives. Like, our purposes are that stake in the ground. That's what we are. That's what basically determines what we do or where we need to go. The other pieces are kind of in that foundation that is the hard work, right? What is your metric of success? What is it that, what are your pure intentions? Why are you doing this? That's the evolution of life. And what I would then say is development, right?
So how did you specifically decide what things needed changing in your life? Otherwise, how did you decide this thing needs to go? I need to do more of this thing personally.
Well, you got to slow down to speed up. And so I took a month off. And it was in that month of being very quiet, which for me is difficult, as you can probably tell. So we got to slow down. We've got to extricate ourselves through bringing in outside practical resources, friends, professionals that can help us assess these things and then dissect it. And as I looked at kind of this soup, I was able to then see, all right, well, the chicken stock in that soup is like beer for me, right? Because it was adding to my ups and downs of anxiety. So I got to take that out. And then I looked at the other ingredients, and those other ingredients, was my metric of success. And then where it was that I wanted to be, and then where it was that I actually spent all of my time. And that was a massive mismatch because I wasn't spending as much time with my daughters and my wife. So it was pretty simple through the lens of those practical resources. And I say, in the new book, it's super important that we have at least one person that we can get kind of like butt ass naked with, not literally, but like, where we can be super vulnerable, and that person can act as a foil and a practical resource for us to call us out on our own crap. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's a guy, he's actually, you wouldn't pair us up. He's 64 years old. His name's Jimmy. And he's the one that acts as my foil in a lot of these things that I think that I'm aware of, but I might not be. Mm-hmm. So so it's an imprecise, I think, science, I guess. But, one, take a time out, right? Slow down to speed up. And then two, find those people within your network or seek out professionals to help be a practical sounding board and foil for you.
Wow. My last question is kind of a selfish one. How do you connect, if it's possible, even on the 1-to-many scale? In your case, you have written now 2 books. I podcast. We are all creating these platforms with the technology that's available to us that allows us to connect theoretically, quote unquote, with many. Well, how do you actually make that like a true connection?
I think it comes down to a few things. One is confidence, and confidence is learned, right? So you gotta do the at-bats. I've been on over 700 podcasts, right? So it's through a lot of these conversations that I'm able to get that confidence and deliver a message that is punchy. Mm-hmm. It's also through that process that I've also learned, especially that 1-to-many thing. People remember stories, right? Mm-hmm. So what are the stories, like my Shawshanking story? Right. What are those stories that people can remember and differentiate you? And then the last piece of it is the importance of personal branding. And you can see in everything that I do, I am very deliberate about trying to be memorable in how I present myself. So I actually have a new pair of glasses that are bright yellow. All of my glasses are bright yellow. You can see the Savior Asks in bright yellow. And then the cover of my book with my yellow glasses and Savior Asks. And then you've got my kind of tattoos that Kiyoki and I have worked on, which is my life story on my body now. It's that personal, and that's one of the chapters in the book. Is the importance of personal branding, but you got to stand out. And, quickly, like put into context, I interviewed, and she actually wrote my foreword. Her name's Lydia Finette. And Lydia wrote a book called The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You. And what's so cool about Lydia is her currency, her day-to-day job is she's one of the head auctioneers at Christie's. And she talks about how when you're standing up on stage, and you're on stage with Bruce Springsteen or Matt Damon, you've got to do something a little bit different. And, she calls it the strike. And in any conversation, she will actually have the little gavel in her purse and she hits it 3 times. And it's with those 3 knocks, that strike, that she goes into conversations with the confidence that she needs. But then the other piece that's so important is she tells stories that are memorable, that differentiates herself. And she's also able to take in those things around her that in a quick kind of witty way makes herself seem a little bit self-effacing, a little bit vulnerable and funny, right? So, So I'd say it comes down to those things that it's reps too, right? You got to do a lot of these things before you are probably ready. And it's a gradual build. And, I think our society right now, we only really celebrate those champagne moments. We only, it's not until you have 20,000 followers on Instagram that you have a big fun. It's like, that's such BS. Like we are trained in all of the wrong ways. And instead we got to look at the process and these gradual wins that we have on a weekly basis that are building towards what hopefully won't just be a crescendo. It's development, right? Yeah. It's always evolving. And so, and I actually find, I've probably instigated at least 12 of my friends now writing books. Like a great way to get kind of your stories out there is through the process of writing a book. Whether or not anyone reads it, that doesn't matter. It helps you have that discipline to take your thinking and put it into something that is digestible. And it's an exercise that I encourage anyone that's trying to influence through these lenses to do.
Wow. That was Well, I just have to say, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. That was more than what I asked for, and it was a really good show, really thought provoking for me personally, because connecting is something that I definitely need to put more reps in. But before we let you go, we need to ask, how can people reach out to you, support you, and see what you're up to?
So the best way to reach out to me is actually on Instagram. And my Instagram handle is at TUFF22, the number 22. And I respond to all of those things. So that's the best way. The next best way, which is emailing me, chris@christuff.me. And that's where some emails go to die. Some I see. But once again, the best way to reach out to me is on Instagram.
Excellent. I will get
and
that.
then, if you wanted to learn more and see, if you go to christuff.me, you can kind of see all my stuff there and the books and the links and all that.
For sure. And then for listeners, make sure you guys get your copy pre-ordered of Savior Asks, which comes out in March, you said?
Yeah, March 1st. Yeah.
Excellent. And then we also need to give our audience some action items. So this is the list that I came up with. Number 1, ask someone about their dreams. Number 2, give someone a give. Number 3, perform the your Google exercise 10 times or so until you really nail it down. Number 4 is write your purpose/passion. Is there anything you'd like to add to that list or modify in any way?
No, the purpose exercise is interesting. On page 92 of the Millennial Whisperer, I have a really good exercise that I take people through. But there's also other resources, I think, around purpose that are a lot more sophisticated. Simon Sinek is a absolute master at this. So look into This Is Your Why, and some of the workbooks he has are phenomenal.
Excellent. So I will put those all in the show notes. Audience, listeners, feel free and reach out to Chris and just tell him how much you love today's episode, and go follow him on Instagram. But thank you so much, Chris, for being here and telling us your stories and being on the Hard Thing podcast.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the podcast. If you get a moment, please reach out to Chris and let him know how much you enjoyed today's episode. Reach out to him on his social medias. Next, if you get an opportunity, go to OURrescue.org and learn about my favorite nonprofit organization, Operation Underground Railroad. They're a nonprofit organization that goes undercover to rescue kids from sex trafficking, and they do amazing things. Honestly, they have been to some of the darkest places of the world and rescued children who had no other hope. So they need a lot of help. And the best thing that you can do right now is go to OURrescue.org and learn about what they do and the problem that is sex trafficking. Thank you guys again for listening to the episode. And if you're looking for an experience that you will not soon forget, boy, have I the opportunity for you. Imagine sitting down and having dinner with an undercover spy, someone who has spent 10 years assuming different aliases to build up the interests of security for our nation and tear down the interests of other antagonistic nations. Yes, that's right. My previous guest, Andrew Bustamante, has offered the opportunity for you as a listener to sit down with him and myself here in Utah for dinner and have a night out that you will be able to brag to your friends for years and years and years. You'll be able to ask him questions, get down to the nitty-gritty, aside from what's not confidential, obviously, and really just have this experience that few will ever have in their lifetime. All you got to do is go to the link in the show notes, sign up today. Space is very limited. In fact, there's only one spot. So first come, first serve. All you got to do is sign up and then get yourself to Utah for a dinner with myself and Andy Bustamante, undercover spy. Thank you guys again for listening to today's show. Make sure you do the action items. We'll see you back next Monday for another amazing episode of the Hard Thing podcast. But until then, my friends, keep doing hard things because you will overcome average.